When it comes to marketing and selling an NFT project, sometimes it all comes down to process. What method you're using to mint or distribute, all of that stuff is so important. But arguably the most important process is the auction itself. How are you going to implement the auction? What type of auction are you going to use? How can you get the most out of that initial push to sale? Well, today I'm going to help you figure that out by first showing you in more detail why this matters, then talking about the types of auctions along with their advantages and disadvantages, and finally I'm going to help you figure out which style of auction for you to pick for your own business. My name is Trent Kennelly. I'm a Web3 marketing strategist, and this is the best place for you to learn about Web3, NFTs, the metaverse, and how to market it all. So that sounds good to you and you're excited, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to my channel if you're into it, comment to let me know the best auction process that you have seen up to this point. I would love to know, and let's get started. All right, so let's first take a quick jaunt into why this matters. So your auction is a point of determination for the whole project. It can sometimes live and die by the launch alone. Now, I don't want to say that that's always the truth. There are plenty of examples to the contrary, but deciding how you're going to sell to people matters because in some ways it drives your market closer to or further from a purchase. So let's go ahead and run through all of the options for your auction type just so we can get a better idea of those, and then we'll figure out how to pick them. The first type of auction is a fixed auction. So in a fixed auction, there's no bidding involved really at all. It's more like a retail transaction than it is an auction. You see something you like, you buy it. The advantage here is simplicity. There's no negotiation, the price is the price. You don't go into an Apple store and negotiate the price for your Mac. You either buy the Mac at the price that they prescribe or you leave. Simple as that. The disadvantage though is that it's harder to respond to market forces with this. So if you sell your collection for a fixed price and suddenly the worth of your collection absolutely skyrockets, you're suddenly going to find yourself almost giving away your NFTs. A great example of this is Doodles. So they were selling fairly well for about 2 months after their launch, and then after Christmas 2021, sales for the collection absolutely went through the roof. If they were running a fixed auction and only a fixed auction for their NFTs, they just never would have been able to respond to that in time, and they would have missed a lot of sales. Next is the classic auction. So the classic auction is kind of what we've come to expect at this point. In the real world, you've got the auctioneer speaking way too fast and pointing at people who just twitch their nose because they think that that's a bid, right? So it's not really like that online. You should probably think of it more like eBay. So effectively, the seller starts the bidding at a base price, 0.5 ETH, 1 ETH, whatever it is, and people can bid higher than that amount. Whoever has the highest bid at the end of a certain time limit, maybe 48 hours, 7 days, a month, whatever that seller sets, that person is the winner. The huge advantage here is that this type of auction more closely follows market forces and allows people to buy based on the value that they are ascribing to the NFT. So if more people start to consider the NFT more valuable, then the price goes up because more bidders are willing to pay more, right? They just want to get their hands on that NFT, so they're willing to put more money forward. The disadvantage for this one is simply that there are a lot of moving pieces that could more easily contribute to a failed auction. Maybe nobody bids, the base price is too high, or something else happens that leaves you selling for less than you paid. And a failed auction is generally pretty bad for the future of your collection, just doesn't bode well generally. Next is a Dutch auction. So a Dutch auction is also referred to as a reverse auction. It sets a high price and a baseline or reserve amount. So the price of the item is going to reduce incrementally from that high price down to the reserve price over a period of time. So if somebody buys it before then they get it at that price. Otherwise, it'll bottom out at a certain reserve price, and that's where it will sit. A famous example of this is Azuki. You can watch this video for a deep dive into this project and kind of what they did. So Azuki started the sale with a Dutch auction, and they started the price of all the NFTs in their collection at 1 Ethereum. Every 15 minutes for the next 48 hours, they reduced the price of any NFTs that had not been sold in the collection incrementally. So it went down kind of algorithmically every 15 minutes if it hadn't been sold over the next 48 hours. So that really kind of drove that FOMO, and that's kind of the huge advantage here. They drove a lot of FOMO by making people see, look, this is going to be bought at any moment. Are you willing to buy it at this level? If not, then somebody else might be, right? And so their concern is somebody might get to this piece before I can get to it. And so it's going to increase the likelihood that people are going to buy and buy at a higher level. However, do keep in mind here, the biggest disadvantage is that buyer's remorse is stronger using Dutch auctions than basically any other auction type, because people are more likely to believe that they overpaid, which could lead to quick flipping behavior. The next auction type is a whitelist. So a whitelist is an elite group of people that have access to purchase the NFT first before the collection is open to a public auction. So you can check out this video for lots of details about whitelists, and this is also something that Azuki employed as well. So this is hugely advantageous because that elite group member will be more likely to make a purchase more quickly than people who aren't in the group. Just think of it this way. When you're in the club, whatever club that is, it feels good, right? You're not part of the outside, you're part of that in crowd, whatever that in crowd means to you. And because you're in, you're part of the movement, which makes it more likely that you're going to do what the rest of the elite group is going to do as well, which is why whitelists tend to lead to more sales. The huge disadvantage though comes if you overuse them. So to understand this, let's go back to one of the oldest marketing principles out there today. If your market is everybody, your market is nobody. And the exact same idea applies here. If everybody enters your whitelist, you might as well just say that you don't have a whitelist. Remember that whitelists are all about exclusivity. And if you have a 10,000 person whitelist, you just cannot expect a feeling of exclusivity to set in ever. And I want to make one more point about whitelists here. It is really important that you don't use a whitelist as your only purchase level. Remember that there's only a subset of your total market that can be a part of your whitelist if you want the best results. So this is best used in combination with another auction type, something else. We're going to talk about combos in just a minute, but just keep that in mind. This cannot be a standalone, the only thing that you use in your auction. Next, let's talk about reserves. So a reserve is just kind of like a classic auction, meaning that the next bid is always higher than the last one, and whatever the highest bid is at the end of the auction is the winner. The difference here is that the auction, the seller, has put a minimum amount that they're willing to accept. So the obvious advantage here is that you don't have to worry about losing money on the auction. The reserve effectively means that if the minimum amount isn't reached, the auction fails to find a buyer. So you just take possession of the NFT again and go about your business. Maybe you set a new auction or whatever. But it's important to remember that there is a huge disadvantage here. It basically weakens your NFT's ability to fluctuate with the market. Because if buyers consider your NFTs to be worth less than the reserve price, they're just not gonna buy. Next, let's talk about no reserve. So no reserve is kind of the opposite of reserve, okay? It's a classic auction. There's a bidding system just like a classic auction. The difference here is that there is no safety net at all. You don't have a minimum amount before you're obligated to sell. Whatever the last highest price before the end of the auction, that is what you are obligated to sell for. It sounds crazy, right? But there are actually advantages to this. Most notably, it entices more people to want to bid because they don't have to worry about this invisible baseline that needs to be met. But of course, there are disadvantages, namely that it's highly risky. If your goal is to sell an NFT for a $1,000 payout, but the only bid at the end of the auction is for 1 cent, then it doesn't matter, you have to sell it for 1 cent, you are obligated. And then finally, let's talk about combinations. So it's notable that you can combine basically any of these into a series. So for instance, as I've talked about a couple times now, Azuki did a Dutch auction, then a whitelist, and then a fixed public auction. That allowed for different pieces in the collection to find their particular values individually while increasing the overall value of the collection. And this is the real advantage of the combo model. Different parts of the process are going to appeal to different people, and it's going to drive higher levels of FOMO, and it can more quickly lead to a sellout. That said, let's consider the disadvantage of combining different auction types is that sometimes your audience is going to lose focus before the sale gets to a level that they can take advantage of. Remember, attention spans online are very short. And if that happens, you just run the risk of lower sales, that's all. So now that we've got all those auction types kind of under our belt, let's talk about which one or group we should be using. In a lot of ways, this really depends on who your sub-niche is. So I've talked about this in this video, but you obviously, while you have a similar market on OpenSea as everybody else selling NFTs, you also have a sub-niche. You have a smaller group of people that you can target a little bit differently based on what your NFT project is, what they're doing, etc. So for instance, the group looking for high art like Wild Vikings are probably more likely to respond to a direct auction with a whitelist, but people who are looking for things like doodles are probably going to find a stronger use for a Dutch auction because they're cartoony and appeal to a slightly younger audience. Now, I don't know what their auction type is for doodles, for instance. You'll have to kind of do your own research to know that. That's just kind of what I'm thinking based on my expectations, my experience in the past, etc. But that said, there are a few things that should always be considered. So first, I honestly can't foresee any reason that you would really want to use a no reserve auction. Yes, it does reduce friction, but at the end of the day, the reduction in friction doesn't matter if you're losing so much money on the sale, right? I mean, I know I gave an extreme example, but all the same, you don't want to take that risk. I don't think that that's really worth it. Also, I almost always suggest a whitelist, so there's rarely a downside to adding FOMO to your project. You can check out this video all about emotional triggers, just to kind of get an idea about that. But a whitelist is going to serve just to entice more people to want to purchase because it drives that FOMO. And finally, I'm personally a big fan of combo auctions. If you can find the right combination, it can have a huge impact on your final outcomes. Again, looking at Azuki, they found a combination that really drove that FOMO to heights that in many ways have resonated even until today. So there you have it. That is a hugely detailed breakdown of NFT auctions and kind of a lot of the things you really need to know about it. I hope that helped you to kind of hone in on the right ones by taking a close look at the way each is put together so that we can kind of understand which ways to go down the line from here. No pressure, but it is really important to consider this during your launch phase. So if this was a great video for you, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to my channel if you're into it, comment to let me know the best auction execution that you have ever seen. I would love to know, and I'll catch you in the next one.